What if I told you that every time you try to convince someone, you're already losing? What if the reason people ignore you, manipulate you, disrespect you, or take you for granted has nothing to do with your intelligence, your looks, or your abilities? What if the real problem is that you're playing by rules that were designed to keep you weak? Most people spend their entire lives chasing approval, explaining themselves, seeking validation, and desperately trying to control others. And because of that, they become predictable, controllable, replaceable. But the most powerful people in the world operate differently. They understand a hidden truth that dates back centuries, a truth that Niccolo Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. The less you need something, the more power you have over it. In this video, you'll discover 13 Machiavellian laws of reverse psychology that reveal how influence really works, why people resist direct control, and how the most effective individuals make others willingly move in the direction they want. But be warned, once you understand these laws, you'll start seeing manipulation everywhere, and you'll never look at human behavior the same way again. If you're enjoying this deep dive into psychology, power, and human behavior, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Less than 10% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed. If you're serious about mastering influence, self-control, and the hidden rules that shape success, join us now. Because the next lesson might completely change the way you see the world. If this video opened your eyes, don't stop here. Subscribe now and become part of a community dedicated to understanding power, psychology, strategy, and self-mastery. New videos every week designed to help you think deeper, move smarter, and stay 10 steps ahead. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember, the strongest move is often the one nobody sees coming. Comment below, which of the 13 Machiavellian laws do you think is the most powerful and why? Is it the illusion of choice, strategic silence, scarcity, withdrawal, or self-mastery? I read every comment and I'd love to hear your perspective. Write your answer below. There is a strange contradiction at the center of human nature. People say they want freedom, they demand independence, they insist that nobody can tell them what to do. Yet every day, millions of people willingly follow trends, obey social expectations, and adopt beliefs they never truly questioned. Why? Because the human mind is not as logical as it pretends to be. Beneath the surface exists a powerful force that quietly controls decisions, relationships, and even entire societies. That force is resistance. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something most people never realize. The easiest way to make someone reject an idea is to force it upon them. The moment people feel their freedom is threatened, they stop evaluating the idea itself and begin defending their autonomy. They no longer ask, "Is this true?" Instead, they ask, "Why are you telling me what to do?" This subtle psychological shift changes everything, and once you understand it, you'll begin seeing it everywhere, in business, in politics, in relationships, even in yourself. The first law begins here. Law 1. The ego hates orders. Imagine two scenarios. In the first scenario, someone says, "You need to do this immediately." Your reaction is almost automatic. You feel tension. A small resistance appears, even if the suggestion is correct, even if it benefits you. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of a command, they ask, "What do you think would happen if you tried this?" Suddenly, your mind opens. You feel involved. You feel respected. You feel free. The information is identical, but the delivery changes everything. This is because the ego values autonomy more than accuracy. People would rather be wrong on their own terms than right under someone else's control. That is why great influencers rarely force. They guide. They create the illusion that the conclusion was reached independently. And when people believe they made the decision themselves, they defend it passionately. The irony is fascinating. Most individuals think they are protecting freedom. In reality, they are reacting to pressure. Remove the pressure, and resistance often disappears. This principle explains why parents struggle with children, why managers struggle with employees, why couples struggle with each other. The harder you push, the harder they resist, not because they disagree, but because they feel controlled. Machiavelli recognized that direct force should always be the last option, because force creates enemies, influence creates allies. The person who understands this gains a tremendous advantage. They stop fighting resistance, they learn how to move around it, and that brings us to the second law. Law 2, the forbidden magnet. Have you ever noticed that people become obsessed with things they cannot have? The unavailable relationship, the exclusive opportunity, the secret information, the closed door, the forbidden path. Scarcity creates fascination. The moment access becomes limited, value appears to increase. This isn't always rational, but it is deeply human. Psychologists call this reactance. When freedom is restricted, the mind becomes determined to restore it. Tell someone they cannot do something, and suddenly doing it becomes a mission. Tell them they shouldn't want something, and now they want it even more. This principle has shaped human behavior for centuries. Luxury brands understand it. Elite organizations understand it. Powerful leaders understand it. The less available something appears, the more attention it receives. This doesn't mean playing manipulative games. It means understanding perception. People often overlook what is freely available. They chase what appears rare, what appears selective, what appears difficult to obtain. The lesson here is profound. Stop forcing attention. Stop begging for recognition. Stop making yourself endlessly available. Value often grows in the presence of limitation, not abundance. The strongest attraction frequently emerges when there is space for curiosity to develop. And curiosity leads directly into the third law. Law 3. Silence creates pressure. Most people fear silence. Silence feels uncomfortable, awkward, dangerous. The average person rushes to fill every pause, every gap, every moment of uncertainty. But silence is one of the most underestimated tools in human interaction, because silence creates psychological pressure. Imagine asking someone a difficult question. They give a vague answer. Instead of responding immediately, you simply remain silent. You maintain eye contact. You wait. What happens next? Most people start talking again. They explain more, reveal more. Sometimes they reveal everything, not because you forced them, but because silence made them uncomfortable. Silence creates a vacuum, and human beings naturally rush to fill it. This is why powerful negotiators often speak less. This is why confident leaders rarely over-explain. This is why calm individuals seem more intimidating than loud ones. Words reveal information. Silence conceals it. The less others know about your internal state, the harder you are to predict. And unpredictability creates influence. Most people think power comes from speaking. Often, power comes from withholding speech. Because every unnecessary explanation weakens mystery. Every unnecessary reaction reveals vulnerability. Every unnecessary defense gives others insight into your emotional triggers. Silence does the opposite. Silence protects. Silence observes. Silence collects information. And most importantly, silence shifts attention away from you and onto the other person. That is where influence begins. Not through domination, not through force, but through understanding. How people convince themselves. Most people think influence is about changing someone's mind. It isn't. Changing someone's mind directly is one of the hardest things you can ever attempt. Human beings are emotionally attached to their beliefs. Their opinions become part of their identity. Their identity becomes part of their ego, and the ego does not surrender easily. This is why arguments fail so often. Two people enter a conversation believing they are discussing facts, but beneath the surface, they are defending identities. One person is trying to protect their self-image. The other is doing the same. The louder they argue, the deeper they dig into their positions, and neither side moves. Machiavelli understood a principle that modern psychology would later confirm. People rarely change because they are convinced. People change because they convince themselves. The moment an idea feels self-generated, resistance disappears. The moment it feels imposed, resistance grows stronger. That brings us to one of the most misunderstood principles of influence. Law 4. Let them argue your side. Imagine trying to push a heavy object uphill. The harder you push, the more energy you spend. Now imagine standing behind it and allowing gravity to work for you. Suddenly, everything becomes easier. Influence works the same way. Most people try to force agreement. They defend every point, counter every objection, challenge every criticism, and in doing so, they accidentally strengthen the opposition. Why? Because every argument gives the other person an opportunity to reinforce their position. The more they defend their viewpoint, the more committed they become to it. The smarter strategy is different. Instead of arguing harder, ask questions. Instead of proving, explore. Instead of forcing conclusions, guide discovery. When people arrive at an idea themselves, they feel ownership, and people protect what they own. Think about the greatest teachers you have ever met. They didn't simply give answers. They asked questions that led you toward answers. The lesson felt deeper because you discovered it, not because it was handed to you. This principle appears everywhere, in leadership, in sales, in relationships, in politics. The most persuasive individuals are often the least argumentative. They understand that influence grows stronger when people believe the decision belongs to them. Machiavelli knew that a ruler who forces obedience creates resentment. A ruler who inspires voluntary agreement creates loyalty. The difference is enormous. One survives through control, the other survives through influence. And influence lasts longer. The trap of winning arguments. There is something dangerous about being right. Being right feels good. It satisfies the ego. It provides a sense of superiority. But winning an argument often comes at a hidden cost. The other person may surrender publicly while resisting privately. They nod their head. They say, "You have a point," but internally, they become more determined than ever to reject your message. Why? Because humiliation creates resistance. Nobody likes feeling defeated. Nobody enjoys feeling foolish. And when someone's pride is threatened, logic stops mattering. The conversation becomes emotional. The goal becomes self-protection. This is why intelligent people often fail to persuade others. They possess facts, they possess evidence, they possess logic. But they forget that human beings are emotional creatures first. People do not change because they lose arguments. They change because they feel safe enough to reconsider. The person who understands this becomes incredibly influential because they stop trying to win debates and start guiding discovery. Law 5. Strategic withdrawal. Now let's move into a darker principle, one that governs attraction, attention, and human value. Strategic withdrawal. Human beings are strange. We often fail to appreciate what we have until it disappears. We become accustomed to constant availability, constant attention, constant validation. Over time, we stop noticing it. It becomes normal, expected, invisible, but remove it suddenly, and everything changes. Imagine someone who messages you every day, then one day they stop. Immediately, your attention shifts. Questions emerge. What happened? Are they busy? Did something change? Why aren't they responding? The absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. This is not merely social behavior, it is psychological. The brain notices change, not consistency. Consistency fades into the background. Change demands attention. Machiavelli understood that excessive availability reduces perceived value. Anything constantly available feels abundant, and abundance often decreases appreciation. Scarcity creates focus. Scarcity creates awareness. Scarcity creates perceived value. This principle appears throughout life. A favorite song loses impact if played continuously. A luxury item loses status if everyone owns it. Even attention becomes less valuable when it is unlimited. The lesson is not to become distant. The lesson is to stop overextending yourself. Stop chasing people who make no effort. Stop flooding others with attention they have not earned. Stop treating your energy as an unlimited resource. Your time has value. Your attention has value. Your presence has value. People recognize that value most clearly when it is not constantly available. Why absence reveals truth. Strategic withdrawal serves another purpose. It reveals reality. When you stop initiating contact, who reaches out? When you stop carrying the conversation, who keeps it alive? When you stop solving every problem, who steps forward? Absence exposes dependency. Absence exposes priorities. Absence exposes effort. Many people spend years wondering how much they matter to others. A short period of strategic distance often provides the answer, not because it manipulates anyone, but because it removes the illusion. You finally see who values your presence when your presence is no longer guaranteed, and that knowledge is priceless. Law 6. Challenge the identity. Now we arrive at one of the deepest principles in psychology. People will defend their identity more fiercely than their possessions. Because identity is not something they own. It is something they believe they are. Think about it. A person may abandon a goal, abandon a habit, abandon an opinion, but challenge their identity? Now, you've touched something deeper, something emotional, something personal. Machiavelli understood that behavior follows self-image. The labels people attach to themselves shape their decisions. A person who sees themselves as courageous wants to act courageously. A person who sees themselves as intelligent wants to appear intelligent. A person who sees themselves as disciplined wants to maintain that image. The identity becomes a compass, and the ego works tirelessly to stay consistent with it. This creates extraordinary opportunities for influence, not through manipulation, but through understanding. When you acknowledge positive traits in people, they often rise to meet them. Tell someone, "You're the kind of person who keeps their word," and they suddenly feel pressure to remain consistent. Tell someone, "You're one of the most dependable people I know," and their identity becomes linked to dependability. Now they feel compelled to act accordingly. Why? Because consistency feels safe. Contradiction feels uncomfortable. The human mind prefers alignment. It wants actions and identity to match, and that preference can become a powerful force. The danger of negative labels. Unfortunately, this principle works both ways. Negative labels can become self-fulfilling. Call a child lazy often enough, and eventually they may accept the label. Call someone irresponsible repeatedly, and they may begin acting accordingly. People tend to move toward the identities they repeatedly hear. This is why language matters. This is why leaders matter. This is why parents matter. This is why the stories we tell ourselves matter. Because identity quietly shapes behavior, and behavior shapes destiny. The most influential people understand this. They don't merely change actions, they influence self-perception. Because when identity changes, behavior follows naturally. The hidden theme connecting all three laws. At first glance, these principles may seem unrelated. Let people argue your side. Strategic withdrawal, challenge identity. But beneath the surface, they share a common thread. All three avoid direct force. None rely on commands. None rely on pressure. None rely on domination. Instead, they work with human nature rather than against it. They respect the ego's need for autonomy. They recognize the power of perception. They understand that people resist force but embrace self-discovery. This is why they are effective. Not because they control people, but because they align with how people already think. There is a dangerous misconception that controls most people's lives. They believe that influence happens through force. They believe the loudest voice wins. They believe power belongs to the person who talks the most, argues the hardest, or demands the most attention. History proves otherwise. The greatest influencers rarely appear dominant. They do not force, they do not chase, they do not beg. Instead, they understand something deeper. Human beings are creatures of emotion pretending to be creatures of logic. Most decisions are not made consciously. They are made emotionally and then justified intellectually afterward. People do not buy because of facts. They buy because of feelings. People do not fall in love because of logic. They fall in love because of emotion. People do not commit because they were convinced. They commit because they became emotionally invested. This is where reverse psychology becomes extraordinarily powerful, because it works beneath awareness, it bypasses resistance, it slips past the conscious gatekeeper, and once you understand how it works, you begin to see it everywhere. The politician using it, the marketer using it, the leader using it, the partner using it, the friend using it, even your own mind uses it against you. Machiavelli understood that direct force creates opposition. Indirect influence creates compliance. The moment people feel controlled, they resist. The moment they feel autonomous, they cooperate. And this brings us to the next law. Law 7. The power of self-discovery. Nothing is more valuable to a person than an idea they believe they discovered themselves. Think about the last argument you had. Perhaps you tried to convince someone. You presented evidence. You explained your reasoning. You offered facts, and yet they remained unconvinced. Why? Because people do not defend truth. They defend identity. The moment your idea challenges their identity, their defenses activate. Logic becomes irrelevant. Now, imagine a different approach. Instead of telling someone what to think, you ask questions. You guide, you suggest, you create curiosity, you allow them to arrive at the conclusion on their own. Suddenly, the same idea becomes acceptable. Why? Because now it belongs to them. Machiavelli understood that ownership creates commitment. People fight harder for ideas they believe are theirs. This is why master influencers rarely lecture. They guide, they plant seeds, they create conditions, and then they allow human nature to do the rest. A skilled strategist never pushes someone toward a conclusion. He creates a path so natural that they walk there willingly. The destination was chosen long ago. The traveler simply believes he found it himself, and belief is far more powerful than instruction. Law 8. The scarcity effect. The human mind has a strange weakness. It undervalues what is available. It overvalues what is scarce. This pattern appears everywhere. Luxury brands understand it. Collectors understand it. Investors understand it. Powerful individuals understand it. The less available something becomes, the more desirable it appears. Scarcity creates significance. Availability creates indifference. Think about relationships. Many people make a fatal mistake. They become constantly available. Instant replies, constant reassurance, unlimited access. They believe this will increase appreciation. Instead, it often produces the opposite effect. Human psychology adapts quickly. What is always available becomes invisible. What is difficult to obtain becomes valuable. This does not mean playing games. It means understanding perception. A person with a full life naturally creates scarcity. Their time is valuable. Their attention is limited. Their energy is focused. They do not manufacture importance. Their priorities created naturally. Machiavelli recognized that power often comes from controlled absence rather than constant presence. Sometimes the strongest message is not delivered through action. Sometimes it is delivered through withdrawal. When something disappears, people finally notice its value. The silence becomes louder than the noise. The absence becomes stronger than the presence, and the void begins doing the work for you. Law 9. The paradox of detachment. Most people sabotage themselves because they want something too much. They want approval, they want validation, they want acceptance, they want certainty. And because they want it desperately, they reveal weakness. Neediness leaks through behavior. It appears in their words. It appears in their body language. It appears in their decisions. People can sense it immediately. Desperation creates pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Resistance destroys attraction. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth. The person who needs the outcome least often controls the outcome most. Why? Because they are free. They are not trapped by fear. They are not manipulated by anxiety. They are not controlled by the possibility of loss. Imagine two negotiators. One desperately needs the deal. The other can walk away. Who holds the power? The answer is obvious. The ability to leave is power. The ability to remain calm is power. The ability to lose without collapsing is power. This is why detachment is so misunderstood. Detachment is not apathy. Detachment is not laziness. Detachment is not indifference. Detachment means your identity does not depend on the result. You pursue, you work, you strive, but your emotional stability remains intact regardless of the outcome. When people sense this energy, everything changes. You become difficult to manipulate, difficult to pressure, difficult to control, and suddenly the world responds differently. Because confidence without attachment is one of the rarest forces on earth. Law 10. The curse of explaining. Most people talk too much, not because they have something valuable to say, but because they are afraid of being misunderstood. Someone questions them, they explain. Someone criticizes them, they explain. Someone doubts them, they explain. Every explanation reveals insecurity. Every justification signals dependence. Every defense invites further attack. Machiavelli observed that power often hides itself. The powerful do not constantly explain. They do not seek permission. They do not chase approval. They act. Then they allow results to speak. This does not mean becoming silent forever. It means understanding when silence is stronger than words. When someone accuses you unfairly, excessive explanation often makes you appear guilty. When someone challenges your decision, endless justification suggests uncertainty. When someone attacks your character, defending yourself may validate the attack. The strongest position is often calm acknowledgement, not panic, not argument, not emotional chaos, just certainty. A person who knows who they are does not feel compelled to convince everyone else. The lion does not explain why it is a lion. The mountain does not justify its existence. They simply exist. And existence itself becomes proof. The less you need others to validate your identity, the more powerful your presence becomes. The hidden mechanism behind all influence. Now, step back and observe what these laws have in common. Scarcity, detachment, silence, self-discovery, autonomy. Every one of them follows the same principle. People resist pressure. People embrace freedom. The moment someone feels pushed, they pull away. The moment they feel free, they move closer. This principle governs relationships, leadership, business, politics, negotiation, and personal growth. The greatest mistake people make is trying to control others directly. Direct control creates rebellion. Indirect influence creates cooperation. The master strategist understands this. He does not fight human nature. He works with it. He understands that every person wants dignity. Every person wants choice. Every person wants ownership. And when those needs are respected, resistance disappears. The door opens. The walls fall. The path becomes clear. But there is still one final lesson. A lesson deeper than all the others. A lesson that separates the amateur from the master. Because ultimately, the greatest reverse psychology is not used on other people. It is used on yourself. There is one final illusion that traps almost everyone who studies power. They believe power is something you use on other people. They imagine influence as a set of techniques, a collection of psychological tricks, a toolbox filled with strategies, manipulations, and clever tactics. They learn how to create scarcity. They learn how to use silence. They learn how to frame conversations. They learn how to trigger emotional reactions. And yet, despite knowing all these methods, they remain powerless. Why? Because they have ignored the most important battlefield, the battlefield within themselves. Machiavelli understood something that many modern people miss. No man can rule a kingdom if he cannot rule himself. The person who cannot control his emotions will eventually become controlled by someone who can. The person who cannot master his fears will eventually obey those fears. The person who cannot govern his desires will spend his life being manipulated by them. Most people believe they are making choices. In reality, they are reacting. They react to praise. They react to criticism. They react to rejection. They react to fear. They react to uncertainty. Their lives become a chain of emotional responses disguised as decisions, and every reaction hands power away. The ultimate Machiavellian lesson is not about controlling others. It is about becoming impossible to control. The invisible chains look carefully at your life. What controls you? Maybe it is the fear of rejection. Maybe it is the need for approval. Maybe it is loneliness. Maybe it is status. Maybe it is money. Maybe it is the fear of being misunderstood. Everyone has chains. Most people simply refuse to see them. The world does not manipulate you through force. It manipulates you through your attachments. The moment someone discovers what you desperately need, they gain leverage. If you desperately need praise, they control you through approval. If you desperately need love, they control you through attention. If you desperately need status, they control you through recognition. If you desperately need certainty, they control you through fear. The chain is never external. The chain is internal. And until you identify it, you will continue mistaking slavery for freedom. Machiavelli observed rulers constantly: kings, generals, nobles, advisors. He noticed a pattern. The strongest leaders were not always the smartest. They were not always the most talented. They were not always the most educated. But they possessed one quality that separated them from everyone else. They remained composed when others became emotional. They stayed calm when others panicked. They stayed focused when others became distracted. They governed themselves before attempting to govern circumstances. And that made them dangerous, because a person who cannot be emotionally manipulated becomes incredibly difficult to defeat. Why most people fail. Most people approach influence backward. They ask, how can I make people respect me? How can I make people listen to me? How can I make people value me? Wrong questions. The real question is, why do I need those things so badly? That question makes people uncomfortable because it forces them inward. And most people spend their entire lives avoiding themselves. They distract themselves. They entertain themselves. They numb themselves. Anything to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth. The truth that much of their behavior is driven by fear. Fear of being insignificant. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being unworthy. These fears operate silently beneath the surface, like hidden software running in the background. You cannot see them, but they shape everything. The job you choose, the partner you pursue, the arguments you enter, the risks you avoid, the opportunities you miss. Everything. And until those fears are confronted, no amount of strategy will save you, because eventually your emotional needs will betray your intentions. The mask will slip, the desperation will show, and people always sense desperation, the paradox of true power. The greatest paradox of power is this: the less you need power, the more power you possess. At first, this sounds absurd, but think carefully. Who appears more powerful? The person desperately trying to impress everyone, or the person comfortable being misunderstood, the person constantly seeking attention, or the person focused on their mission, the person terrified of losing, or the person willing to walk away? The answer is obvious. Neediness creates weakness. Detachment creates strength. This is why so many powerful people appear calm. Not because they never feel fear, not because they never experience uncertainty, but because their identity does not depend on external outcomes. They can lose and remain whole. They can fail and remain whole. They can be criticized and remain whole. They can be rejected and remain whole. And that emotional independence creates tremendous leverage, because fear loses its grip. And when fear loses its grip, freedom begins. The shadow that follows you. There is another lesson Machiavelli would likely agree with. A lesson explored centuries later by the psychologist Carl Jung. Every person has a shadow. The shadow is the part of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. Your anger, your envy, your ambition, your selfishness, your desire for power. Most people pretend these qualities do not exist. They bury them, they deny them, they project them onto others, and because they deny them, they become controlled by them. The person who claims they never feel jealousy becomes consumed by jealousy. The person who claims they never seek power becomes manipulated by power. The person who claims they never feel anger becomes ruled by resentment. What you deny controls you. What you acknowledge can be managed. This is why self-awareness is not weakness, it is strength. The most dangerous person is not someone without darkness. The most dangerous person is someone who understands their darkness and chooses how to use it. They are not surprised by themselves. They know their flaws. They know their temptations. They know their vulnerabilities. And because they know them, they are harder to manipulate. The shadow has already been brought into the light. The final reversal. Now we arrive at the final reversal, the ultimate application of reverse psychology. And it is not directed toward another person. It is directed toward yourself. Most people spend their lives chasing outcomes, chasing approval, chasing success, chasing validation, chasing certainty. And the more they chase, the further those things seem to move away. Why? Because obsession creates tension. Tension creates anxiety. Anxiety creates poor decisions. Poor decisions create poor outcomes. The cycle continues. The master reverses the process. Instead of chasing outcomes, he focuses on becoming the kind of person capable of producing them. Instead of demanding respect, he develops competence. Instead of demanding confidence, he develops discipline. Instead of demanding admiration, he develops character. Instead of demanding success, he develops skill. This changes everything, because now the focus shifts from external rewards to internal growth. And paradoxically, external rewards often follow. The world responds differently to someone who is grounded, someone who is disciplined, someone who is emotionally stable, someone who does not desperately need anything from anyone, not because the world is fair, but because confidence attracts, competence attracts, certainty attracts, neediness repels. The chessboard of life. Earlier, we spoke about life as a chessboard. Most people move like pawns, reacting, following patterns, responding emotionally to whatever appears directly in front of them. But the strategist sees differently. He sees multiple moves ahead. He understands consequences. He understands timing. Most importantly, he understands himself. Because self-mastery is the foundation of all strategy. Without it, knowledge becomes dangerous. A person with influence but no self-control becomes reckless. A person with intelligence but no discipline becomes ineffective. A person with power but no wisdom becomes destructive. This is why every law we discussed ultimately leads back to the same place. The mind, not someone else's mind, your own. That is the true kingdom. That is the true battlefield. That is the true source of power. The final challenge. So here is the challenge. For the next 7 days, observe yourself. Not other people. Yourself. Watch what triggers you. Watch what makes you defensive. Watch what makes you anxious. Watch what makes you seek approval. Watch what makes you lose composure. Do not judge it. Simply observe it. Become a student of your own psychology. Because every reaction reveals a chain, and every chain you identify is a chain you can eventually break. The goal is not perfection. The goal is awareness. The goal is freedom. Freedom from compulsive reactions. Freedom from emotional dependence. Freedom from needing the world to constantly reassure you. Because once you achieve that freedom, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing power, and power begins gravitating toward you. Not because you manipulated anyone, Not because you mastered some secret trick, but because you mastered the one person who determines the quality of your entire life, yourself. That is the final lesson. That is the deepest law. And that is the secret hidden beneath every strategy ever written. Master yourself, and the world becomes a very different place.